I supported my daughter and her husband for 8 years when my house burned down. They laughed, but they weren't laughing when they found out what I did next. Before we begin today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us keep creating. My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore, but most folks just call me Ellie. 72 years have gone by since I took my first breath in a little farmhouse outside of Topeka, Kansas. I've seen crops rise and fall, babies turn into mothers, and promises fade quicker than the paint on an old barn door. Life as I've come to know it is a long stretch of both kindness and cruelty, and sometimes they come wearing the same face. I never thought I'd live long enough to tell this story. Not because I've been sick or broken, but because some memories feel too heavy to carry past the grave. Yet here I am, sitting in my rocking chair by the window of this quiet apartment, telling you about the day my world turned to smoke, and how laughter, cruel, cold laughter, turned me into someone I didn't recognize for a while. You see, I wasn't always alone. I had a husband once, Harold. Strong hands, a quiet soul, and the kind of man who'd patch a neighbor's roof before fixing his own. We raised one daughter, my sweet, complicated Melissa. Lord, she was a firecracker from the start. Smart, beautiful, too sure of herself for a girl her age. I suppose she got that from me. But somewhere between high school and heartbreak, she became someone I didn't quite understand anymore. When she married Daniel, I bit my tongue. He was polite enough on the surface, charming even, but I'd seen the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself it wasn't my business. Every mother wants to believe her child knows best. That belief kept me silent, even when silence felt like betrayal. For years, I helped them however I could. Babysat their little boy, paid for Melissa's dental work when insurance fell short, and even co-signed on their mortgage when they wanted to move out of that cramped apartment. It wasn't about money to me. It was about family. Family to me meant showing up, even when it hurt. Then one winter night, everything I owned, every photo, every quilt, every memory stitched into the corners of that house went up in flames. It was January 14th. I remember because it was the same night I'd planned to bake a peach cobbler. Harold's old recliner was still by the window, and I'd laid out a blanket for the cat. I'd fallen asleep watching reruns of The Golden Girls, of all things. I woke to the smell of burning plastic and the sound of the smoke alarm screaming for help I couldn't give. The fire department said it was faulty wiring, said it spread too fast for me to have saved much. Maybe they were right. All I know is I stood outside in my slippers, clutching a photo album against my chest, and watched 50 years of living dissolve into orange light. I thought the worst was over then. It wasn't. When the embers cooled, I had nowhere to go but to Melissa's. She opened the door wearing her robe, hair in curlers, and a look I'll never forget. Not pity, not love, just inconvenience. Daniel stood behind her, his arms crossed, eyes sliding over me like I was some unexpected bill he didn't want to pay. "Of course you can stay, Mom," Melissa said. "Just until we figure things out." I believed her. The first week was quiet, too quiet. I tried to stay out of their way, kept the kitchen clean, folded laundry, even offered to babysit while they worked. I told myself I was helping, earning my keep. But I started to notice things. The way Daniel sighed when I turned on the TV, the way Melissa rolled her eyes when I asked about dinner plans. It was as if my presence had turned their house into a place they didn't recognize. One night as I was making tea, I overheard them talking in the next room. My name floated through the air like a secret that had slipped loose. "She's milking this," Daniel said. "House burns down and suddenly she's our responsibility." Melissa whispered back, "I know, but what am I supposed to do? She has nowhere else." He laughed. That kind of low, mean laugh that sticks to your ribs. Maybe she should have thought about that before she got too old to live alone. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, staring at the steam rising from the kettle. It's strange how grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just settles quietly at the bottom of your soul, waiting. I wish I could say I left then, that I had the courage to pack my bags and never look back. But where would I have gone? The insurance money hadn't come through. My pension barely covered the basics. So I stayed. For 8 years. 8 years of biting my tongue, of cleaning up after people who never said thank you, of sitting through dinners where my own daughter made jokes about old people problems while her husband smirked across the table. I became a ghost in that house, useful, invisible, disposable. But I wasn't dead yet, and life, as cruel as it can be, has a funny way of giving you one last hand to play. I won't tell you what I did just yet, not now. You'll understand better once you've walked through the rest of the story with me. But I'll say this much. When they laughed at me, they forgot one important thing. Ashes don't stay quiet forever. There's a strange kind of silence that settles in a house that isn't yours. It's not the peaceful kind either. Not like the hush that comes after rain, when the air smells clean and forgiving. No, this was the kind of silence that hums under your skin. The kind that makes you second guess the sound of your own footsteps, wondering if you're walking too loud or breathing too much of someone else's air. That was my life for the next 8 years. After the fire, Melissa and Daniel cleared out a little room for me, the one that used to be their home office. They moved the desk into the garage and set up a twin bed in its place. I brought what little I'd salvaged from the house: a half-burned jewelry box, a few photo albums, Harold's pocket watch, and the quilt my mother made when I was 16. Everything else was gone. You learn a lot about what truly matters when you're standing in the ashes, and yet, even the smallest things you save start to feel heavy when they're all that's left. In those first months, I tried to convince myself this was temporary, that the insurance money would come through, I'd find a small place of my own, and things would go back to normal. I even clipped rental listings from the newspaper and circled them with a red pen. But each time I called, something fell through. Either the rent was too high or the places were already taken. Eventually, the stack of clippings gathered dust on my nightstand. I became part of the household, but never quite in it. Mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up before the sun, just like I always did, and make coffee. Old habits die harder than pride. I'd sit at the kitchen table waiting for the sound of feet on the stairs, the sleepy thud of a morning routine. But most days, I only heard Daniel's voice calling for Melissa to hurry up. And sometimes, if they were in a good mood, I'd get a distracted morning mom as they rushed out the door. I made myself useful. I cooked dinners, cleaned bathrooms, folded laundry, and mowed the lawn when Daniel couldn't be bothered. It wasn't asked of me, not directly, but the unspoken expectation hung in the air like a rule everyone knew but no one had written down. And for a while I didn't mind. Keeping busy kept me sane. Doing things for them gave me purpose. But slowly it started to change. The kindness that once lived between us, the easy affection of mother and daughter, began to sour. I could see it in Melissa's eyes when I offered advice, or in Daniel's smirk when I forgot to put something back exactly where it belonged. I became their burden, their live-in ghost. I remember one afternoon, Melissa came home with new curtains for the living room. Soft yellow ones, the color of sunflowers. She asked what I thought, and I smiled. "They're lovely," I said. "They make the room feel warm." She rolled her eyes. "It's supposed to feel warm, Mom. The old ones made the place look like a retirement home." I wanted to tell her that the old ones were my gift, that I'd bought them with my last Christmas bonus years ago. But I bit my tongue. You learn when you live under someone else's roof that swallowing words becomes second nature. Each one goes down like a stone, settling heavy in your stomach until you can barely breathe. And then there were the small humiliations, the kind that chip away at your spirit bit by bit. Like the time Daniel joked at dinner that I should start paying rent if I was going to hang around forever. Or when Melissa asked if I could help out a little more financially because the grocery bills have gone up. I wanted to remind them of the 8 years I'd supported them. The tuition payments, the car repair I covered, the down payment on the house they lived in now. But instead I smiled and said, "Of course, honey." Because pride, I've learned, is a luxury for people who have a place to fall back on. It wasn't all cruel, though. There were moments, small, fleeting, that still glimmered with something like love. When their son, my grandson Eli, would climb into my lap and fall asleep against my chest, smelling like crayons and sunshine. When Melissa got sick with the flu and I stayed up through the night making soup and checking her temperature like she was still my little girl. Those moments reminded me that kindness still lived somewhere in that house, even if it had forgotten my name. But the longer I stayed, the more invisible I became. Daniel started making decisions without even looking at me. Melissa began to speak to me like a guest she couldn't wait to leave. Once, when some of their friends came over for dinner, I heard her introduce me as my mom. She's staying with us for a while. A while. After 6 years. That one stung. Time has a way of bending when you're waiting for something to change. Seasons passed like chapters in a book I couldn't put down but didn't enjoy reading. Every spring, I planted flowers in the small patch by the front porch. Marigolds, mostly, because Harold used to say they were the color of resilience. And every autumn, I'd rake the leaves, humming old songs to myself, pretending the crunch under my shoes was the sound of moving forward. But life wasn't moving forward. It was circling, quietly, painfully. Then came the night that broke something inside me for good. It was a Friday, late October. The air outside had that crisp, smoky chill that always reminded me of my childhood. I'd spent the day cleaning, baking pumpkin bread, and setting the table early because Melissa had mentioned they were having friends over. By 6, the house was glowing with candlelight, and the smell of cinnamon filled the air. I felt proud for a moment, like I'd made a home again, even if it wasn't truly mine. Their friends arrived just after 7. I stayed out of the way in the kitchen, pretending to fuss with dishes while they laughed and poured wine. I didn't want to intrude. I just liked hearing laughter, even if it wasn't meant for me. But then, somewhere between the second bottle of wine and dessert, I heard Daniel say, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know what's crazy? Ellie here used to have a house. Burned it right down. Now she's our permanent roommate." Laughter. Not the light-hearted kind. The sharp, mean kind. Melissa laughed too. Not a big laugh, but enough. Enough to let me know she wasn't defending me. Someone said, "Guess that's one way to get free room and board." And the laughter rose again. I stood there behind the half-open door, my hands trembling around the dish towel. I wanted to storm in and say something. Anything. To remind them that I had once saved them from foreclosure. That I had given them everything I could, and then some. But instead, I put the towel down, walked to my room, and closed the door quietly behind me. I didn't cry right away. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the quilt my mother made, the one with tiny embroidered stars in the corners. I traced them with my finger, feeling the frayed edges, the soft wear of time. Then, finally, the tears came. Slow at first, then unstoppable. Not just because of what they'd said, but because of what it meant. That I was no longer seen as family, just obligation. A burden wrapped in old memories. That night, something in me changed. Not anger, not bitterness, something quieter, colder. Resolve, maybe. The kind that comes when you finally realize no one's coming to save you, so you'd better learn how to save yourself. I started making plans after that, quietly, carefully. The insurance money, after years of back and forth, had finally been released. A modest amount, but more than enough to live small and comfortable. I hadn't told Melissa. I let her believe it was still tied up in paperwork. It wasn't out of spite, not yet. It was self-preservation. I knew that if she or Daniel caught wind of it, they'd find a way to convince me to invest or help out with the mortgage. I'd seen how they handled money. It disappeared faster than snow in April. Instead, I opened a private bank account under my maiden name, Grace, and began tucking the checks and deposits away. I paid close attention to what they valued, what they ignored, and what they assumed I'd never notice. Daniel liked to think he was clever. He'd leave bills out on the counter, muttering about how tight things were, as if fishing for sympathy. Melissa would sigh, talk about how we're doing the best we can, and then 2 days later, come home with new handbags or salon receipts. They were living above their means, counting on my silence as insurance. And for a while, I let them. But every quiet night after they went to bed, I'd sit by the window in my little room and write in a notebook. Notes, reminders, plans. I wasn't sure yet what I was building toward, but I knew one thing for certain: I would not die in that house. By the 8th year, Eli was nearly a teenager, taller, restless, always with a phone in his hand. But he still came to me sometimes, still called me Grandma Ellie, in that half whisper he thought no one else could hear. He'd tell me about school, about the fights his parents had, about how he wished they'd stop yelling so much. That boy's heart was soft, too soft for the world he was growing up in. It was during one of those talks that I realized what I wanted most. Not revenge, not payback, but freedom. A life that belonged to me again. To laugh without permission. To breathe without feeling like an inconvenience. I started packing slowly, a piece at a time. A photo frame here, a book there. Things small enough not to be missed right away. I sold a few old keepsakes online under a pseudonym, enough to pad the savings. No one noticed. They never did. Then one morning, as I was folding laundry, I overheard Melissa on the phone in the next room. Her voice was low, impatient. "She's not going to live forever, Daniel. When she goes, the money comes to me anyway." I froze. My blood ran cold. It took me a moment to understand. They were talking about my will, the one I'd written years ago before the fire, naming Melissa as my sole heir. I'd never updated it, never thought I'd need to. That night, I pulled out my old notebook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote 3 words in neat, careful handwriting. "It's time now." When I look back now, I think the hardest part wasn't deciding to leave. It was learning how to disappear without hatred in my heart. Hatred makes noise. It leaves fingerprints on everything it touches. I didn't want that. I wanted silence, the kind that means peace, not punishment. After that night, the night I heard my daughter talking about my will, I couldn't sleep for 3 days. I'd close my eyes and hear her voice, matter of fact, like she was reading a grocery list. "When she goes, the money comes to me anyway." That she, that me, spoken so lightly, unstitched something deep inside. I'd spent my whole life believing love could survive anything. Distance, disappointment, even betrayal. But that sentence taught me something I never wanted to know. That sometimes the people you'd die for would rather wait for you to. On the fourth morning, I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote down every step of what I needed to do. Not out of revenge, out of clarity. Because when you live too long under someone else's roof, your thoughts get tangled with theirs. I wanted mine back. I started small. First, I visited the library, one of the few places that still felt like home to me. The librarian, a kind woman named Joy with silver hair and a gentle voice, helped me print new legal forms. "Updating your will," she asked with a smile. "Something like that," I said. It felt strange, holding those papers in my hand, like holding the reins of my own life again. I made a quiet appointment at the courthouse in town, where a notary witnessed my trembling signature. I left every penny. The insurance money, my pension savings, even the little life insurance policy Harold had left me. Not to Melissa, not to Daniel, but to my grandson Eli. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting what still felt pure. Next, I went to the bank. I asked to convert my private account into a trust under Eli's name, to be released when he turned 21. The banker, a young man who smelled faintly of cologne and nervousness, kept glancing at me like I might change my mind. I didn't. When it was done, I felt lighter, not joyful, but steady, like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for surviving. After that, I started planning my exit, quietly, patiently. I researched senior apartments on the public library computer, places with sunlight and soft chairs and little balconies for growing herbs. There was one about 30 minutes away called Maple Hollow. The photos showed flower beds and a courtyard with rocking chairs. It looked peaceful. I called the number listed. The woman who answered, her name was Carla, spoke with warmth. "We have a waiting list, but a few units are opening soon. Would you like to come for a tour?" I said yes before my courage could falter. The tour was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I told Melissa I had a doctor's appointment in town. She barely looked up from her phone when I mentioned it. "Okay, Mom. Just let yourself in when you get back." That was her way of saying I'm not really listening. Maple Hollow was even lovelier in person. Clean hallways that smelled faintly of lavender, gentle laughter echoing down from a crafts room, sunlight pouring through wide windows. Carla walked me through the units, modest but homey. I stopped in one with a small kitchenette, a bay window, and pale green walls. "This one feels right," I said softly. "We can hold it for you," Carla said. "Just let us know within a month." I thanked her, and when I got back to the car, I sat for a long time in the parking lot, staring at the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. Freedom, I realized, is heavier than chains, at least at first. That evening, I made dinner as usual, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Daniel's favorite. He came home late, smelling of beer and office stress. Melissa trailed behind him, her smile brittle. "Long day?" I asked. "You could say that," Daniel muttered, loosening his tie. He didn't look at me when he sat down. We ate mostly in silence. The television hummed in the background, a game show, the laughter track grating like sandpaper. When I asked if Eli had eaten, Melissa shrugged. He grabbed something at a friend's house. You don't have to worry about that stuff anymore, Mom. That anymore stung, as if care itself had an expiration date. Later that night, after the dishes were done, I found Eli in his room, headphones around his neck, sketching in a worn notebook. He was good, really good. His pencil strokes were deliberate, thoughtful. You ever think about studying art? I asked, leaning in the doorway. He smiled shyly. Maybe. Mom says it's not practical. Well, I said, neither is spending your life doing something you don't love. He grinned, the kind of grin that cracked open a little space of light inside me. You sound like Grandpa. That's the nicest thing you could have said, I told him. We sat together a while, talking about nothing and everything, the way people do when they're holding on to moments they don't realize are their last. Before I left, I handed him an envelope. Don't open this yet, I whispered. But one day, when you're older, promise me you will. He nodded, serious as a vow. That was the first seed of my goodbye. Over the next few weeks, I packed little by little. A box of books here, a stack of clothes there. I donated most of my things to charity, keeping only what truly mattered. Harold's watch, my mother's quilt, a few photos, and a small wooden box that held letters from a lifetime ago. I rented a storage locker near Maple Hollow under my maiden name, Grace Whitmore, and moved the boxes there one afternoon while Melissa was out shopping. No one noticed. It surprised me how easy it was to become invisible when people had already stopped seeing you. One evening, Daniel came home early, fuming about something at work. I was setting the table when he snapped. Could you not hover, Ellie? God, I can't even think with you fluttering around. Melissa laughed softly, not cruelly this time, just tiredly, and said, She's trying to help, Daniel. I pretended not to hear. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed, breathing slowly until the noise of their argument faded into the hum of the refrigerator. That was when I knew, really knew, I couldn't stay another winter there. My spirit had become too small for that house. I circled the date on my calendar, November 20th. That would be my leaving day. No goodbyes, no explanations, just a quiet exit. I'd send a letter afterward, kind but final. The morning of the 20th arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that smells like the start of change. I woke before dawn, packed the last of my things into 2 suitcases, and took one last look around the little room that had been both my cage and my shelter. I ran my fingers across the windowsill, over the faint groove where I used to rest my coffee mug. Then I whispered, Thank you for keeping me safe, to no one in particular. Eli was still asleep upstairs. I left a note on his desk, a short one. Dear Eli, you've got a good heart. Protect it. Draw your dreams before the world tells you to erase them. I love you, always. Then, quietly, I placed my house key on the kitchen counter. Melissa's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. She was on the phone, oblivious. For once, I didn't feel hurt, just free. I walked out the door, the morning air cool and clean against my cheeks. I took the bus to Maple Hollow. Carla greeted me with that same warm smile. You decided? She asked Id. I said, I'd like to make this my home. Within a week, I had moved in. My room was small, yes, but it had sunlight that stretched across the floor in golden lines each morning, and quiet neighbors who greeted me kindly. The first night, I made myself tea, sat by the window, and watched the stars rise above the town. For the first time in 8 years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. I thought maybe that was the end of the story, a soft fade out, peace restored. But life, as always, had one more twist tucked in its sleeve. A month later, just after Christmas, I received a letter in the mail from Melissa. The envelope was thin, the handwriting rushed. I could almost feel the anger pulsing through it. Mom, we came home and found your note. I don't understand what you were thinking. You could have told us. Now Daniel's furious, and Eli's been sulking ever since. If you needed money or space, you could have said so instead of running off. We're family. You can't just disappear like that. Call me when you get this. Melissa. I read it twice, my hand steady. There was no mention of love, no apology, only wounded pride, as if I had broken some silent contract to keep absorbing their unkindness. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into my journal, and did not call. 2 weeks later, A second envelope arrived, this time from a lawyer's office. Inside was a copy of my new will, stamped and notarized, along with a formal notice confirming its registration. Somehow Melissa had found out. I guess she'd tried to access my bank account and been told she wasn't listed anymore. That's when the phone calls started. Dozens of them. At first, I ignored them. Then, one evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. Her voice came through sharp, trembling. "What is this, Mom? Some kind of punishment? You're cutting us out of everything after all we did for you?" I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but disbelief. "All you did for me?" I asked softly. "Melissa, I gave you 8 years of my life. I gave you comfort when I had none. You laughed at me when I was broken, and still I loved you. But I can't give you what you never gave back." "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "Daniel says—" "I don't care what Daniel says," I interrupted, my voice steady, stronger than I'd expected. "This isn't about him. It's about you. One day, maybe you'll understand." There was silence on the line, then a shaky breath. "So what? You just disappear? You're never coming back?" I looked around my little apartment, at the soft light spilling through the curtains, at the mug of tea steaming gently beside me. "I already came back," I said. "Just not to you." Then I hung up. After that, the calls stopped. The letters, too. Weeks turned to months. I heard from Eli occasionally. Little postcards with doodles, signed, "Love you, Grandma." Each one felt like sunlight. One afternoon, while watering the geraniums on my balcony, I overheard two women down below talking about a foreclosure on Maple Street. A big house with yellow curtains, repossessed after the owners fell behind on payments. I didn't ask questions. I just watched the clouds drift by and whispered a quiet prayer for mercy. Not for punishment, just mercy. Life has its own way of teaching lessons. It didn't need my help. That night, I pulled out my journal and wrote the final line under my old note from years before. "It's time now." Then below it, I added, "And I am free." Peace has a sound. It's not silence exactly. It's softer than that. It's the hush of morning light spilling through lace curtains, the slow creak of a rocking chair that's earned its place, the whistle of a kettle right before it sings. For the first time in years, that sound was the background music of my days. Life at Maple Hollow was gentle in a way that made time blur. I made friends with women who had stories older than mine. Grace, who'd been a school teacher for 40 years and still corrected my grammar with a smile. Bernice, who wore too much perfume and talked about her husband as if he'd just stepped out to the store. And little Marjorie, a retired nurse who knitted scarves for everyone she met. We'd sit in the courtyard each morning, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. There was laughter, the easy kind, the kind I hadn't heard in my own house for too long. And when the days turned cold, we'd move indoors, sharing soup and stories by the big window that overlooked the maple trees. It was a small life, yes, but it was mine again. I thought about Melissa less and less. Not because I didn't love her anymore, but because loving her no longer meant losing myself. That was the quiet miracle of healing. You don't have to erase the pain, you just stop feeding it. But healing, I've learned, doesn't mean the past stops knocking. It just means you answer the door differently. It was late spring when she came. I remember because the lilacs were blooming outside my window, purple and fragrant, their scent floating in through the open screen. I was at my table, writing a letter to Eli. He just turned 15 and sent me a drawing of a sunrise with a little note that said, "For Grandma, who taught me that light always comes back." I smiled reading it, tracing the lines with my finger. That boy had Harold's soul, patient, steady, kind. Then there was a knock at my door. It wasn't the light, familiar tap of one of the ladies. It was heavier, uncertain, like someone testing the courage behind their hand. I hesitated, a ripple of old memories stirring in my chest. When I opened it, there she was, Melissa. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, streaked with gray at the temples. She wore a coat too heavy for the season, her purse clutched like a shield. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Hi, Mom," she said finally, her voice small. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd heard her call me that. "Hello, sweetheart," I said softly. "Come in." She stepped inside, looking around at the tidy little space. Her eyes landed on the quilt draped over my chair, on the framed photo of Harold, on the vase of fresh flowers by the window. "This place, it's nice," she said, almost surprised. "It's home," I replied. "Would you like some tea?" She nodded. "Sure." As I filled the kettle, I could feel her watching me. The silence between us wasn't angry, not anymore, just heavy like dust that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. When I set the cups on the table, she spoke. "I tried calling a lot. You never answered." "I know," I said. "I needed space." Her eyes shimmered. "I thought you were mad at me." I took a slow breath. "I was hurt, Melissa. That's different." She looked down, twisting her fingers. "I said awful things. We both did. Daniel isn't here," I interrupted gently. "So let's not make this about him." She looked up then, really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to run barefoot through the garden, with jelly on her chin and flowers in her hair, the one who used to climb into my lap when thunder scared her and whisper, "Don't let go, Mama." "I don't even know where to start," she said finally. "Everything went wrong after you left." I stirred my tea, waiting. "Daniel lost his job a few months later," she continued, voice trembling. "We tried to keep up with the bills, but we couldn't. The house, I heard," I said quietly. "I'm sorry." She blinked, surprised by the kindness. "You're sorry? After everything?" I should be the one saying that. I smiled a little. "You just did." She exhaled, her hand shaking as she reached for her cup. "You have no idea how much I've thought about what I said that night, what we both said. I don't even know why I laughed, Mom. I think I didn't know how to deal with it, with you being there, with the guilt." "Guilt?" I echoed. She nodded. "You lost everything, and I didn't know how to help you without feeling like I was failing too. I guess it was easier to make jokes than to face what I felt." There was truth in her voice, raw and trembling. "I know," I said. "I didn't make it easy either. I stayed too long. Maybe I was afraid to admit I needed help." "You did help," she whispered. "You always helped. I didn't appreciate it until it was too late." We sat in silence for a long while, the clock ticking softly behind us. "I found your will," she said suddenly. "And the trust. For Eli." "Yes," I said. "You didn't even tell me." "I couldn't," I replied. "You wouldn't have understood then." She swallowed hard. "I thought you were punishing me." "No," I said gently. "I was protecting him. You were angry and lost, and Daniel, well, he had a way of making you forget who you were. I didn't want Eli caught in that." Tears filled her eyes. "You think I'm a bad mother?" I reached across the table, laid my hand over hers. "No, I think you were doing the best you could with what you knew. But I also think you forgot what love looks like when it doesn't cost anything." Her face crumpled then, all the years of pride and pain folding into something small and childlike. She started to cry, quiet at first, then shaking with it. "Oh, Mom," she whispered, "I don't know how to fix any of this." I squeezed her hand. "You start by not trying to fix it. Just be here, that's enough." She looked up through her tears. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why didn't you hate me for what I said, for what I let happen?" I smiled softly. "Because hate keeps you tied to the fire. I'd already lived through one." She gave a watery laugh, covering her face with her hands. "You always have to turn things into poetry, don't you?" "Maybe," I said. "It's how I remember the good parts." We sat together for hours after that, talking about small things at first, Eli's drawings, the old neighbors, the cat I'd once had. Slowly, the air between us began to soften. The words came easier. The laughter, tentative, then real, returned like something we'd both been holding our breath for. When she finally stood to leave, the sun was setting, turning the room gold. She looked around again, her eyes lingering on the quilt. "You still have it," she said. "Of course," I said. "It's warm, still holds." She smiled, the corners of her mouth trembling. "So do you." I walked her to the door. For a moment, we just stood there, unsure how to say goodbye when we'd already lost so much time. Then she leaned in and hugged me. Not a polite, distant hug, but the kind that shakes loose years of silence. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "I never stopped loving you," I said. When she stepped back, her eyes were red but bright. "Can I come again? Maybe bring Eli?" "I'd like that," I said. "Bring your heart, too." She nodded, smiled through her tears, and walked away down the hallway. I watched her go until she disappeared around the corner, her footsteps fading like a lullaby at the end of a long night. When I closed the door, I didn't feel empty. I felt full. Not because everything was perfect now, it wasn't. There were still scars, still old echoes between us, but something had shifted. The weight was gone. I sat by the window and watched the lilacs sway in the evening light. Somewhere, a bird was singing. I thought about Harold, how he used to say that forgiveness is just remembering someone's humanity louder than their mistakes. That night, before bed, I wrote in my journal, "Today, the door opened both ways." And for the first time, neither of us had to knock. When I was a girl, my mother used to say that the heart is a house with many rooms. You can close a door for a while, she'd tell me, but if you keep them all locked, you'll suffocate. That thought stayed with me the week after Melissa's visit. Something in me had unlatched. The air in my chest felt different. Lighter, yes, but also alive, as if forgiveness had opened a window I hadn't known was painted shut. I caught myself humming again while making tea, humming the old tune Harold loved, "You Are My Sunshine." Peace, I learned, doesn't arrive all at once. It tiptoes in on ordinary mornings disguised as habit. 2 Saturdays later, the phone rang just after breakfast. I almost didn't answer at Maple Hollow. Calls were rarely for me, but when I lifted the receiver, a familiar, hopeful voice spilled through. "Grandma, it's me." Eli, that boy's tone carried the same mixture of shyness and excitement he'd had when he was 5, bringing me dandelions like treasure. "Sweetheart," I said, smiling into the quiet hallway. "How are you?" "I'm good. Mom said she came to see you." "She did. She cried when she got home," he said softly. I've never seen her do that before. My throat tightened. "Sometimes tears are the first honest thing we say, Eli." He was silent for a moment. "Can I come visit too?" "Of course you can," I said. "I've got an extra chair and too many cookies for one woman to eat." He laughed. "I'll text you when we're on our way." That afternoon, I dusted the shelves and set out the good china. Old habits. Love has its rituals. I even placed Harold's pocket watch on the windowsill. Somehow, it always made time feel more presentable. When I heard the knock, light, eager, with none of his mother's hesitation, I knew it was him. He'd grown taller, leaner, his hair longer, a sketchbook tucked under his arm. "Look at you," I said, half laughing. "When did you stop being 12?" He grinned. "About 2 years ago, but I still like cookies." I pulled him into a hug. His shoulders were broader, but beneath them I felt the same soft-hearted boy who once drew me stick-figure angels after the fire. We sat at the table, the plate between us already half empty before the tea cooled. "Mom said you moved here because you wanted peace," he said. "Is it peaceful?" "It is," I answered. "But peace isn't a place, darling, it's a practice." He nodded, pretending to understand, and opened his sketchbook. Page after page bloomed with charcoal drawings, faces, buildings, trees bending in the wind. "They're beautiful," I whispered. He shrugged. "They're just things I see." "Then you see the world kindly," I said. He smiled, tracing one picture with his thumb. "Mom said you left the money to me." I paused, then nodded. "It's not really about money, Eli. It's about trust. I wanted you to know someone believes in the life you'll build." "I don't want you to die to prove it," he said quickly, his face flushing. "Oh, sweetheart," I laughed gently. "That's not what wills are for. They're just letters we leave for the future. But we still get to write the ones for the present, too." We spent the rest of the afternoon walking the garden paths behind Maple Hollow. He told me about school, about how he'd started an art club with a few friends, about his plans to apply to an art program one day. When we reached the bench under the big maple tree, he pulled something from his bag, a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. "Mom said I should bring you this," he said, handing it over. I peeled the paper away carefully. It was a painting, our old house. Not the fire, not the ashes, but the house as it once was. White siding, blue shutters, marigolds in bloom. Sunlight spilled through every window in strokes of yellow and gold. My eyes blurred. "Eli, how did you remember it like this?" He looked out at the trees. "Mom found some old photos. She said you'd want to see it the way it was, not the way it ended." Something in me went still. Melissa had helped him paint it. That night, after he left, I sat by the window long after dark, the painting propped against the lamp. The marigolds seemed to glow in the half-light. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't a single act. It's a long conversation between past and present. Over the next few months, Melissa and Eli visited often. Sometimes together, sometimes just him. At first, the conversations were cautious. "How are you? Do you need anything?" But slowly they softened into the kind that stretch across afternoons. Laughter, small memories, shared silence. Melissa started bringing groceries and helping me plant herbs on the balcony. She'd fuss about my blood pressure, about the way I still climbed the stepladder to water the hanging baskets. I let her fuss. That's how daughters say, I love you when they're learning the language again. One day she came alone without Daniel. Her hands were bare, no ring. We sat in the courtyard beneath the maple tree, the spring air sweet with blossoms. It's over, she said quietly. The marriage. I reached for her hand. I'm sorry. She shook her head. Don't be. It should have been over a long time ago. I think I stayed because I didn't know who I was without someone telling me. I smiled softly. Then it sounds like you're about to find out. She exhaled, a shaky kind of relief. I was so scared to tell you. I thought you'd say, I told you so. Oh, honey, I said, squeezing her hand. When I was your age, I thought love meant staying no matter what. But love that asks you to shrink isn't love, it's fear wearing a nice suit. She laughed through her tears. You always have these sayings. They're what old people do instead of therapy, I teased. We sat in silence, watching the sunlight flicker through the leaves. Then she said, almost a whisper, I'm trying to be a better mother. I don't want Eli to remember me the way I remembered you after you left. He won't, I said, because you came back. She looked at me then, eyes glistening. Can we start over? I smiled. We already have. That summer became the gentlest of my life. Eli spent his weekends sketching in the courtyard while I read nearby. Sometimes the residents would pass by and ask about his art, and he'd blush, grinning, as if compliments were still foreign currency. Melissa joined the Maple Hollow Volunteer Committee, helping with events, arranging flowers, laughing with the ladies like she'd belonged there all along. The staff adored her. She's got your kindness, Carla told me once. Maybe she always did. Maybe I just couldn't see it when it was buried under all that hurt. One afternoon, we held a little art show in the community room. Eli's paintings lined the walls, portraits of residents, landscapes of the gardens, even one of me in my rocking chair with the caption, Sunlight at Rest. The guests clapped, and I felt my heart swell so full I thought it might spill. When the crowd thinned, he came up to me, holding a sketchbook. Grandma, he said shyly, can I show you something? He opened to a page filled with soft pencil lines. An older woman and a younger one, sitting at a table, cups of tea between them. The younger woman was crying, the older one was smiling, reaching out a hand. It's you and Mom, he said. The day you made peace, I drew it from what she told me. I touched the page gently. You captured it perfectly, sweetheart. That was the day our hearts started breathing again. He grinned. Do you think forgiveness really changes people? I thought for a moment. I think it lets them change themselves. By autumn, the air turned crisp again, and the leaves flared in colors only Kansas seems to understand. Amber, rust, flame. We spent Thanksgiving together in the Maple Hollow dining hall. Melissa brought a pie that tasted almost like the ones I used to bake, though she'd used too much cinnamon. I didn't tell her. She'd learned by doing, the same way I had. After dinner, Eli stood and tapped his glass. I have something to say. His voice cracked slightly, but he pushed on. I used to think family was just the people you live with, but it's really the people who stay even when you don't deserve it. So thanks, Grandma, for staying. The room went quiet. Melissa reached for my hand under the table, and just like that, the ache that had lived between us for years dissolved into something tender. Later that night when they left, I stood at my window watching their taillights fade into the dark. I whispered a thank you to the sky. Thank you for second chances, for the slow magic of love returning when you thought it never would. Winter came softly that year. Snow dusted the courtyard, and Maple Hollow shimmered under strings of lights. Melissa called often. Eli visited between classes, and every letter he sent began with the same line, Dear Grandma, I'm still painting the light. Sometimes I'd think back to the fire, to the smoke, the laughter, the loss, and feel a strange kind of gratitude. If that house hadn't burned, maybe I never would have learned how strong the human heart is when it finally rebuilds itself from the inside out. Now, each evening, as I sit by the window with my tea, I look at that painting Eli gave me, The House Before the Fire, and I realize something. It's not just a picture of what was, it's a promise of what love can become when it's forgiven. And every so often, when the sun dips low and the world outside turns golden, I swear I can almost hear Harold's voice in the quiet, whispering, "See? See, Ellie? The light always comes back." There's a stillness that settles over Maple Hollow when you've lived there long enough. It's not silence. The world still hums with life. The shuffle of slippers in the hall, the clink of dishes from the kitchen, the low murmur of the television that no one's really watching. But beneath it all runs a slower heartbeat, steady and sure, the kind you start to match without meaning to. I'd been there nearly 4 years when Carla, the young activities coordinator, knocked on my door one Tuesday morning. Her cheeks were flushed with that kind of energy only the young seem to carry. Half caffeine, half conviction. "Miss Eleanor," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Can I steal a few minutes?" I smiled. "At my age, darling, you don't steal time, you borrow it." She grinned, stepping inside. "Fair enough. We're starting a new volunteer program. Local high schoolers spending afternoons with residents. Just conversation, games, that kind of thing. But some of the kids are nervous, and honestly, so are some of our folks. I thought maybe you could help break the ice?" "Me?" I said, pretending surprise. "What makes you think I know how to talk to people?" Carla laughed. "Because every time I walk past your door, someone's already here doing exactly that." She wasn't wrong. Over the years, my little room had become a revolving door of stories. Residents who couldn't sleep, staff needing advice, delivery men who somehow left smiling no matter how tired they looked. I didn't plan it that way. It's just what happens when you leave your door open long enough. Life wanders in. "All right," I said. "What would you like me to do?" "Just be you," she said. "That seems to work on everyone else." The first meeting was on a Friday afternoon. They gathered us in the community room, a dozen residents in their favorite chairs, and maybe 15 teenagers standing awkwardly near the wall, pretending not to text. I remember thinking how funny time is. How when you're young, a year feels endless, and when you're old, it slips through your fingers like silk. We forget that both feelings are the same thing. Awe, just pointed in different directions. Carla clapped her hands. "All right, everyone, let's pair up and get talking." There was the usual shuffle of uncertainty, but eventually each of us had a partner. Mine was a girl named Lila, 17, maybe 18, with ink blue nails and a nervous smile. She sat down, fidgeting with the sleeve of her hoodie. "Hi," she said quietly. "I'm supposed to ask you about your life." I chuckled. "Oh dear, that's a long assignment." She laughed, just a little. "Okay, maybe just, what's one thing you wish you'd known when you were my age?" I thought about that. The room buzzed softly around us, voices overlapping like gentle rain. "I wish I'd known," I said slowly, "that love isn't supposed to hurt." She looked up, startled by the bluntness. "Sometimes," I continued, "we think love means giving everything we have until we're hollow. But real love, the lasting kind, fills both people, not just one." Her eyes glistened a little. "Yeah," she said softly. "My mom says stuff like that, but it sounds different when you say it." "That's because I've lived long enough to mean it," I said, smiling. We talked for almost an hour about school, her dreams of being a nurse, her father who'd left when she was 10, her mother working 2 jobs. At one point, she asked, "Does it ever stop hurting when someone leaves?" I took her hand gently. "No, sweetheart, but one day it stops defining you." When the session ended, she hugged me quickly, like she wasn't used to hugging anyone first. "Thanks, Miss Eleanor," she whispered. "I'll come back next week." And she did. Soon I had more visitors than I knew what to do with. There was Marcus, a lanky boy who'd lost his grandmother and didn't know where to put all that love left over. There was Priya, quiet and sharp-eyed, who wrote poems on napkins and left them on my table. There was Daniel, funny how names circle back, who volunteered only because it would look good on his college application, but who ended up staying long after the program ended. Each of them came for something different, though none of them could have said what it was. I think they just needed someone who'd lived long enough to believe that pain isn't permanent. We'd sit under the maple tree when the weather was good. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we wouldn't, and every once in a while, one of them would ask me to tell a story. Not the kind from books, but the kind you pull from old wounds. I told them about the fire, about the laughter that hurt worse than the smoke, about the years I spent trying to rebuild a home out of pride. and about how forgiveness, when it finally came, didn't sound like trumpets. It sounded like my daughter knocking on a door I hadn't locked. They listened, wide-eyed, and I could see it in their faces. That moment when someone else's story becomes a mirror for your own. As months passed, the program grew. Carla called it Interwoven Hearts, and somehow I ended up its unofficial matriarch. Every new volunteer got the same introduction. If you get lost, just ask Miss Eleanor. She's our compass. I pretended to roll my eyes, but truthfully, it filled me with a kind of quiet joy. I'd spent so much of my life giving, to Harold, to Melissa, to everyone except myself, and now somehow giving had turned into belonging. One evening after the volunteers left, Carla stopped by again, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. "You've changed this place," she said. "Oh, I doubt that," I replied. "The world doesn't change so easily." "No," she said firmly, setting the mugs down. "You changed us. The residents talk more. The kids listen more. It's like you gave everyone permission to be human again." I smiled. "That's all any of us ever need, permission." Carla tilted her head. "Can I ask something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever regret forgiving your daughter? I mean, after everything?" I thought about Melissa, how she now visited every Sunday, how her laughter echoed down the hallway like sunlight, how Eli, nearly grown, sent postcards from college with sketches of maple leaves and notes that said, "Still painting the light, Grandma." "No," I said. "Forgiveness gave me back my family. Regret would have only given me company in my bitterness." Carla nodded slowly. "I hope I remember that when I'm your age." I laughed. "Write it on a sticky note. Tape it to your heart." Winter came early that year. Snow piled against the windows, and the garden outside disappeared under white silence. Most afternoons, the volunteers gathered around the piano, singing old songs they didn't know all the words to. I watched them sometimes from my rocking chair, my knitting forgotten in my lap. They were so alive, awkward, loud, hopeful. I remembered being that young once, too. And I thought, if only we could bottle this open-heartedness, and drink it again when life turns cold. Lila still visited me every week. She'd been accepted into nursing school and came to share her excitement. "I wouldn't have applied if it weren't for you," she said one day, eyes bright. "You made me believe I could take care of people." I smiled. "You already did, darling. You took care of me." She laughed. "You don't need taking care of." "Oh, but I do," I said softly. "We all do in our own ways, even the ones who look like they've figured it out." She hugged me before leaving. That night, I wrote in my journal, "To heal others, you don't need answers, just the courage to stay when their story trembles." In the spring, Maple Hollow held a small ceremony to honor the volunteers. Families came, flowers bloomed, and for once the air smelled like beginnings. Carla asked me to say a few words. I hadn't spoken to a crowd since Harold's funeral, but something in me said yes. When I stood at the podium, faces blurred before me, young and old, all pieces of the same puzzle. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady. "I used to think life was about surviving what happens to you," I began, "but now I know it's about sharing what you've survived so someone else doesn't feel alone." The room went still. I looked at the volunteers, Lila, Marcus, Priya, Daniel, and smiled. "I've learned," I continued, "that forgiveness isn't the end of pain. It's the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom, my dears, is simply pain that learned how to hold someone else's hand." When I finished, there was a hush, then applause that sounded like rain on a tin roof, soft but endless. Afterward, Lila came up, tears in her eyes. "You should write a book, Miss Eleanor." I laughed. "Oh no, the world doesn't need another book. It needs people like you, living ones." That night, back in my room, I sat by the window watching the moon rise over the garden. The snow had melted, revealing the first shy shoots of green. Time, I thought, is merciful in the way it keeps giving us seasons to start again. On my dresser sat 3 framed photos: Harold with his easy smile, Melissa and Eli on their last visit, arms around each other, and one of the interwoven Hearts group, a sea of faces, young and old, all glowing with the same quiet light. Sometimes I still hear the echoes of that old laughter, the cruel kind, the one that once broke me. But now when it surfaces, it sounds different, like it belongs to a story that's finished. Like it was only there so I could learn what gentleness truly means. I sipped my tea, leaned back in my chair, and whispered to the dark, "You see, Harold, I finally figured it out. The fire took the house, but it gave me a home in people." There comes a time in life when the world slows down enough for you to hear your own heartbeat again. It's a gentle thing, steady and unhurried, like a reminder that you're still here, still part of the rhythm. That's how the mornings felt now at Maple Hollow. The first light creeping through my curtains, the kettle beginning its low hum, the smell of jasmine tea. Familiar, simple, holy, in a way. My knees had started to ache a little more when the weather changed, and my steps had shortened. But I didn't mind. Age, I'd learned, isn't a thief. It's just a librarian. It collects all the stories you've lived and asks you softly which ones you'd like to keep on the shelf. Most days I kept the good ones. Harold's laugh, Eli's drawings, Melissa's voice on the phone saying, "Love you, Mom," without hesitation now. But some mornings, I'd still hear the crackle of fire in my dreams, smell the smoke, feel the sting of those words they'd once said. I didn't fight those memories anymore. I just let them visit and leave on their own time. One such morning, I sat by my window, looking out over the courtyard. The garden I'd helped plant years ago had grown wild and generous. The young volunteers had added new flowers every spring, a living collage of all their kindnesses. Someone had even placed a small sign among the lilies that read, "The Garden of Borrowed Time," dedicated to Eleanor Matthews, who taught us that forgiveness blooms in every season. When I first saw it, I'd cried so hard I had to sit down. It wasn't vanity, just awe. To think that the woman who'd once been left in ashes was now being honored for growing things again. Life, I thought, is funny that way. Melissa came that afternoon, her coat unbuttoned, her hair streaked with silver that looked beautiful in the sunlight. She was carrying a basket, inside it a pie, still warm. "Apple," she said, smiling. "Not too much cinnamon this time." I laughed. "You remembered." "I learn eventually," she teased, setting it on the table. Then her eyes softened. "How are you feeling today?" "Like I've lived enough to be tired and loved enough to stay awake," I said. She smiled at that. "Eli's coming this weekend. He wants to show you his new portfolio." "Oh, that boy," I said. "He's painting his way right into the world. Because of you," she said quietly. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Because of everyone who didn't give up on him, including his mother." She looked down, her fingers brushing the rim of the pie dish. "You know, for a long time I didn't think I deserved to come back here. I thought I'd lost you for good." "You did," I said gently. "But I found you again." She blinked, her eyes shimmering. "How?" "By losing everything else," I said. "Sometimes we don't know who we are until there's nothing left to hold but the truth." She nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill. "I wish I could go back." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "Darling, the past doesn't need fixing. It just needs forgiving." When Eli arrived that weekend, it was as if sunlight followed him in. He'd grown into a man, tall, thoughtful, with paint still smudged on his fingers. He brought with him a large portfolio case and that same shy grin that always melted me. "I got accepted," he said as soon as he stepped in. "Full scholarship, Kansas City Art Institute," I gasped. "Eli, that's wonderful," he laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wanted you to be the first to know." Melissa beamed, her pride radiant. For the first time, I saw her not as my daughter, not as someone who'd hurt me or healed me, but as a woman standing fully in her own light. I think Harold would have liked seeing us this way. Three lives that had finally learned to orbit each other instead of collide. Eli laid out his paintings across my small table, portraits of people mostly. One of a laughing child holding a bird, another of an elderly woman reading by the window, and one of a garden filled with wild flowers just like ours. "They're beautiful," I whispered. He hesitated, then flipped to one last canvas. "And this one's for you." It was a painting of fire, not angry or violent, but luminous, flames curling into the shape of a heart, colors of gold and rose, and within the light, a faint silhouette of a house rebuilt, glowing from within. He said softly, "You told me once the fire took your house, but gave you your life back. I wanted to paint that." I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat tightened, and tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. "Oh, sweetheart," I finally said, "you've painted forgiveness itself." He smiled, his own eyes glistening. Maybe that's what art really is, forgiveness with color. Time kept weaving us closer after that. Melissa and I spoke almost every day now, sometimes about big things, sometimes about nothing at all. We started a small book club for the Maple Hollow residents, and she'd drive in every other Thursday to read aloud while Eli was away studying. I could see in her how forgiveness had changed shape. It wasn't just something she'd asked for anymore, it had become something she offered to herself, to others, to me. And as for me, well, I'd found peace in my purpose. The young volunteers still came, though some were new faces now. Lila had graduated nursing school and returned to work at Maple Hollow as a nurse. The first time she walked into my room in uniform, I nearly burst with pride. "See," I told her, "you bloomed." She laughed. "Because you watered me, Miss Eleanor." I shook my head. "No, darling. You just needed someone to remind you were already growing." It was late one evening, maybe early autumn again, when I found myself unable to sleep. The air was cool, and the moonlight painted silver stripes across the floor. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat by the window watching the courtyard. The lilies swayed gently, and the small plaque with my name on it gleamed faintly in the dark. I thought of all the nights I'd sat like this, grieving, remembering, hoping, and now here I was, content. Not because everything had gone right, but because I'd finally learned that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the decision to keep loving anyway. I opened my journal, the one I'd been writing in for years now, and began a new entry. To whoever finds these pages someday, I lost a house once, and for a while I thought that meant I'd lost my life. But what burned down wasn't my home, it was my fear of starting over. I built something better after, not with wood or nails, but with forgiveness. If you're reading this, I hope you build yours too. And if you've ever been laughed at, left behind, or burned by someone you loved, remember this: the light always comes back, but only if you open the door to let it in. I paused, setting down my pen. Outside, the wind rustled softly like applause. The next morning, Carla stopped by, her eyes bright. "Miss Eleanor, did you see the paper? They wrote about the Interwoven Hearts program. You're in it." She handed me the article. There, in black and white, was a photograph of our group in the courtyard. Me in the center, surrounded by young volunteers. The headline read, "How One Woman Turned Loss into Light. The Story of Maple Hollow's Living Legacy." I smiled. "Living legacy," I murmured. "That's a kind way of saying old." Carla laughed. "You're not old, Eleanor. You're timeless." "Oh, don't tell my knees that," I said. But when she left, I looked at that article again and realized they were right. It wasn't about age. It was about endurance, about turning ashes into something worth planting. A few months later, winter returned. The snow came heavy and quiet, muffling the world in softness. Melissa visited for Christmas, bringing Eli with her. We drank cocoa, sang old songs, and laughed until tears came, the good kind this time. When they left, I stood by the window watching them drive away. The snowflakes caught in the lamplight like tiny sparks. For a moment, I saw the reflection of my younger self in the glass, the woman who'd once lost everything, and I smiled at her. "You did all right," I whispered. "You really did. I don't know when my last day will come, none of us do, but I'm not afraid of it. I think when it does, it will feel like closing a well-loved book. You don't cry because it's over, you smile because you finally understand the story. And if anyone ever asks, what did Eleanor Matthews do after her daughter laughed when her house burned down? I hope they say this: she forgave. She built gardens instead of walls. She turned her pain into stories that helped others heal. She found light again, not in the house she lost, but in the heart she found. Because that's what I did next. And somewhere, I imagine Harold standing at the edge of that light, smiling the way he used to when he'd catch me humming in the kitchen. Maybe he'll take my hand and say, "Took you long enough, Ellie," and I'll laugh and say I was busy growing flowers in the ashes. Then we'll walk together, home.